Hello, Johan here with another session of Discovering Dataflicks. And today I'm going to show you a little piece of code that have saved me many times. And I think it's the best piece of code that I've ever written. And it's a real lifesaver. And we're going to use the feature of writing to a file just because we did that last week. So you can go back and watch that video as well if you haven't done that already. What this function does is that it logs whatever you want it to log in the system. It's an easy way of just entering one line of code with the information you want, and you can decide if you want it to be a warning and just an information that is logged in the log, or if it's some error that you want to take care of. But a little note of warning though, if you use this to send emails to yourself and you put it inside some kind of loop, you might end up writing a ton of emails to yourself. So in the future, we might want to do some additional code to mitigate those kind of spam situations. But for now, let's just have a look and see what it does. And back into the code. Let's see, we want to put it right here. And since it's not going to return anything, we might as well use a procedure for this. And I'm going to call it Debug Log. And we want this to be global. And it's going to take a string, its type, and a string message. And I'm just going to copy and paste some comments on top of this that tells us what we want this to do. So if you send in a message, then it's just going to send an email message. Warn is going to send a warning message, and error is going to send an error message. Info is just going to log and not send an email. So that's how I set it up. And this is the way you use it. You write send debug log info and whatever text you want. You might put a variable here to see what is the value of this variable. We want a couple of variables. For instance, this one is IP, it's user agent, and we want its username. And that is because the user agents tells us a little bit if there might be some JavaScript issues depending on the browser the user is using. And the username is so that we can always see who is logged in and who did something that caused this issue, so that we can contact them and ask what they did in the interface. Because often these things happen because there's a new user in the system and they do something a little bit differently. And if you don't know who did it and the system crashes for some reason, you're out of luck. But if you have this feature, you can see that, okay, this was Johan who did this. So let's call him and see what he did to cause this issue. We want to initialize the new line. So let's just move character 10 to str because we want to put some new lines into our document here. You can run a piece of code both from a Windows application and from a web application. So you can have a a script that runs through the browser when some user interacts with it. And you can have a kind of batch job running in the background that also uses the same piece of code. We would like to differentiate between those two, and you can actually do that using this if def is web app. So if it's a web app, we go in here, and if it's not a web app, we use this code instead in diff. And we're not going to add any email to this right now, but I'm going to append all of the information in something I call as Mailbody, because in a later session we might add an email feature to this, and then we're going to use that to send the email. And so what we want to start with is move is type, and then the is message. So this is our first row. So we get the type and the message into our string. Then I would add a debug trace, so you can see where in the code this went wrong. But since Dataflex is compiled, I'm not sure if it's even possible to do that in a Dataflex application. I do that in PHP, for instance, then I get the entire trace, so I know where the error occurred. So here I would suggest that you end the message by writing which file and which line this error occurred. So I'm going to put there. I know there's something you can do to get some trace information, but if you know something, then please write it in the comments below, and I can add it in a later video. Then it's always nice to have a timestamp. So we go with a Mailbody, and then we add a new line, another new line, just to space out the message a bit. And then we add our date. That ring current date time. Okay. Now we get down to the section where we want to differentiate between if it's a web application or a Windows application. And we want to have the username. So what we do to begin with is the same as we do up here. Move the Mailbody. And then we say user, and we add plus its username. But in order to do that, we need to first get the is username of session manager. 2 is username. That's it. The next thing we want to do is we want to get the user agents, and we can get that by writing server variable of pho web service dispatcher http underscore user agent to is user agent, and then we just copy this and say here we have our browser, and then we put the user agent. Now we would like to have the IP address because sometimes you get hackers trying to attack your site, and then it's always nice to have the IP address of the calling attacker, so you can block that user or that IP. So we do again get server variable. We just copy this. In this case, it's the IP, and we get the IP by asking for the HTTPX. Okay, that is not always the case, so we want to check if is IP equals blank or lowercase is IP. No, because then we might want to get that using the remote address instead. That. And then we can finally add the IP address to our list. And now we got some information here. Now we would like to have something similar. And when you run a Windows application, you can actually have a user sessions and log in as users. But as I write web applications mostly, it doesn't make sense to log in. So I don't have any users per se. So that's why I'm writing server here. The user agent, we don't really have to do anything here, but we can just write Dataflex because it's Dataflex running this. And the IP address is probably 7.0.0.1. Now we get to the part where we want to save the file, and sometimes I save this information in a table in a database just to be able to look up certain dates or do queries to find specific errors. But you can do similar things in a file as well, and then you don't have to update the database, and it makes it easier to work with in some sense. So for now, we're going to stick with writing to a file. So we're going to use the procedure we did last week. Write file. And since this one is starting from the workspace, we can just write debug log, and it will end up in our workspace. And then we want to add our Mailbody, SCR, and we might want to add a bunch of minus, just to separate the different entries in the file, so it's easier to read. And then we want to append. Then below here, I would, if I had the email feature implemented, as we do not yet, I would write as type not equals info. And here we would add our code to send an email. And that is it. Now we want to try this. And we do that by going into our little file management application here, and we add a few buttons here. 2, 3. So let's call them info button. Button and error button. And here we can send debug log, and then our error code and our message. We can also create a variable test, then we move 33 to high test, and we can add just string high test to our error message here. And we can do the same here, but instead of error, we said warning. And then we do the same up here. And this is just info. And now we get an error, and that is the session manager. So if we go to the web app source, we can see that we've included the cutils in the top here, but in the top, the session manager hasn't been implemented or activated. So we want to find that. That one, it's right here. So if we put our util after the session manager has been activated, we should be fine. But also notice that we haven't changed the names here. So let's just, in our file manager, go in, write info, form, error. If we go down here, we can see that the buttons are a little bit on the large side. We're just going to make them a bit smaller to clean up the user interface, and we might actually want to move these in slightly. Well, why not? There you go. Now let's run this. So I can click info, I can click warn, and I can click error, and I can click info a couple of times. And if we now go into the folder, we see that we have our debug log here. And if we open that, we can say that we got some info, and we got a warning, and we got the error, and we got the info. So we can use this and just put this one line of code anywhere, and then we will get the browser, the user and the dates. And if you want the login name instead of the username, you can just in the PS username, you can get the PS login name instead, I think. But login name, we could actually add it here as well. But we also need that variable up here. Now if we recompile this and I click one times, see that now we got administrator. And if the IP address weren't from the local machine, as I'm running through the debugger here, we would have gotten the IP address as well. So I think this is a really nice feature. You can get a lot of information just by typing this one line of code. And it's going to be useful later on when we are going to try to figure out how data dictionaries work. It's a really nice feature to have, as it can give you information about when things go wrong, even before the user have the chance to report the error. And there have been occasions where I've contacted the user and telling them that I fixed the bug in the code before they even had a chance to contact me and say that there was an issue in the application. So that's really good support, and it makes me sleep good at night, because I know that if something goes wrong, the application will tell me that there's an issue. There's another thing that we might consider in this, and that is adding this debug log to the default debug entry in Dataflix. And I do have this error handler object that we can use. So if an error occurs, we can actually call this. But I'm gonna play around with it and see how it works first, and then I might do a video on how to use that as well to catch even more errors that might occur in your code. But for now, we're just going to leave it as a feature where you can log variables and stuff going on inside your code where you want to have that information. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like and comment below, and I see you next week. Bye-bye.